until the very end of this conference, and I'd like to thank the organizers for inviting me to do the final address. And of course, when in December, January, I think I was invited by Andreas and Robert, I was very flattered and honored, and I was really proud. But I began to be a bit worried when I received the Book of Abstracts. And I saw this enormous range of papers which stretched over the whole Mediterranean. And I was even more worried on the first and second day, and I became extremely worried during this last discussion when you basically dealt with most of the issues I was planning to raise. So, what do you do as an archaeologist when you're uncertain and do not know what to do? This is a question to you. Well, either you refer to chronology, and I had the plan to discuss comparative chronologies with you, but after 3 long days of sessions, even though it is interesting, this does not seem a good idea. The second tactic is statistics. And we always look for statistics to get on firmer ground. So here are some figures. We've had 3 days, and N is based on the Book of Abstracts, and R is the actual results, so who show up. What we see is that we have 57 papers from 110 speakers and 8 wonderful poster sessions. There were a few no-shows. But it means that we have almost 2 speakers per papers. But this is a skewed picture, because the Italian contingent shows up in groups of 5 or 6. And some of the Greeks as well. There are various speakers who have been in 2 sessions, so who are twice on the board. But there's only one person who's the absolute queen of the conference, who is Sarah Levy, who was in 3 sessions, actually was 4 times on stand. And either this is evidence of her stardom, or this is evidence of the increasing importance of petrography and scientific research on clays in archaeological research, and also the good cooperation within the central Mediterranean of a substantial group of people who cooperate in different projects together. And that's a very important thing of which the Aegean world, I think, could learn. Now, there's all kinds of things you can do with the Book of Abstracts and Statistics. I've considered nationalities, I've considered male-female presentations, but that would be the sociology of this conference. I'm an archaeologist, so I stick to 2 facts: place and chronology. This is what we do as archaeologists. So, if we see the number of papers that cover by areas, we see that the Mediterranean from Western Greece westwards was fairly well covered. And at this point, I think we should acknowledge the courage of Vangelis Nikopoulos, who on his own, and being Greek, represented Spain in this event. And Vangelis, I know you're married to a Spanish woman, but your family-in-law would be very proud of you. But what is very clearly is that Spain became some sort of a phantom Spain. And in a way this is symbolical. Because what are we really looking at? We're looking in different areas at different types of material. If the study of, let's say, Mycenaean contacts to the west is very firmly embedded in ceramic studies, which is the basis, still the basis of the way it has been, these studies have been conducted in the central Mediterranean. But in Iberia and also in Corsica, we're looking at a much more aloof type of material. And in the Balkans, and I'm very happy to see, and I think this conference was unique in the high number of people from Albania and the Northern Balkans participating, and even participants from Kosovo. But the type of evidence that we're looking at is different. Whereas we are basing ourselves in Greece, in Western Greece, in central, in Italy, especially in the Italian mainland, but primarily on pottery. We're dealing with sometimes very vague influences in material culture in the cases of Spain, in the cases of Corsica, and for example, in metals and swords in the cases of Albania and the northern Balkans. Now, what does this mean? What does this say? We speak about Mycenaean or Aegean influences, but in all these areas, but based on different types of material. If we talk about metals trade, the word trade itself, if we talk about contact, so the fashionable word of interaction, I never know what that is, interaction. I never interact. I war, I trade, I visit, I take souvenirs. But interaction is one of these words to avoid the real subject. But isn't it the case that if we have different material sets of archaeological evidence in the different places which are here listed, isn't it the case that we then perhaps also should think, okay, what type of interactions do they relate to? And we need to be very careful by specifying how we step from the material and the types of material to the different types of contacts and mobility that we are talking about. And they may be different for the different areas, since we're seeing different types of archaeological material. And it struck me very strong during this conference that we seem to speak very easily about contacts and trade and exchange, etc., and even war and piracy. Now the second thing, of course, is chronology. This is the pie chart of the various countries, and we can see Albania, Macedonia, and Kosovo taking a chunk, and perhaps we should repeat this in 10-15 years, and I think that the Balkan will cover an even larger portion. Now the second issue is chronology. Those of you counting will see immediately that the number of papers surpass here the number of actual papers, because several papers dealt with different periods. But what is very clear, and I liked that also in the paper by Michalis Gazis, what is very clear is that basically we've been discussing two periods. Late Hellenic 3b, Late Hellenic 3c, and you see it even better in the pie chart that I made. And the Early Bronze Age, the Chetina culture, the Argonauts of the Adriatic. And of course, the post-glacial Mycenaean period. And even though this is evidence of the exciting new ideas and discoveries being made of these particular periods, we do have a problem, I think, with the Middle Bronze Age, for example, in Western Greece. How do we define it? How do we see it? Is it lacking? Surely people lived here. How do we define it? Much of the papers that covered the Middle Bronze Age, so the red sections, actually were sort of, including my own paper, saying, well, early to Middle Bronze Age. Very vague definitions. And also, what is strange is the Palatial period. The Mycenaean Palatial period we actually discussed very, very little. And it's interesting in the sense of the enormous fascination and enormous influence at the moment for the post-Palatial period, that we've been discussing the Palatial period mainly as sort of the upstep to the post-Palatial period, when it really starts happening, the contacts between Western Greece and Central even Mediterranean and beyond. But we do have pre-Palatial and Palatial finds in Italy, and the nature of these contacts between Palatial Greece, and especially the role of Western Greece within the Palatial context, have not been discussed very, very much at this conference. And this is not a criticism, it's more an evidence of the very fact, the enormous influence of the recent discoveries, either in metal finds metal finds from the late Hellenic Greek 3B to 3C period, or the exciting discoveries in terms of pottery from the Chetina culture all over Greece, for example. Now, in terms of themes that we have been discussing, I have jotted down during the lectures on my notes squared general terms of the themes that we've been discussing. And this is the list that I came up with. We've been discussing who actually traveled. Were these the Mycenaeans visiting Corsica, or were there people from the central Mediterranean going west? Were people from the Chetina culture actually going down all the way to Olympia to see the Olympic Games? Or are these different phenomena? Personally, I always feel that if there is an interest to travel, if there's an interest to acquire materials, or if you're forced to travel, it's always an interaction among people which creates two-way traffic. Now, I can't treat every subject. Well, one thing which really surprised me, first of all, is that the sea peoples did come, even though we're dealing with the Western Mediterranean, the sea peoples did, were briefly discussed, but what came as a bigger surprise to me was actually that that myth has been mentioned various times. Now, I'm looking to various, I think 20 years ago this was a no-go area in terms of, but gradually we've been seeing, we've had already on the first day Evangelis Nikolopoulos with the Nostoi, we've heard today about Achilles, the Argonauts, and of course the Odyssey has been mentioned several times. And this is a very interesting perspective, because too long perhaps we have ignored these stories of travel, and which in some way hark back to an earlier period. But of course we all know that myth is not easily used, and maybe as deceptive as it can be enlightening. Now, I can't treat all of these issues, but I would like to go deeper into two of them. And the first is the subject of similarity, which it was raised in various papers by Blackholmer, of course, but also by various other speakers. Now, sometimes, you know, Googling with a glass of beer helps. Things often, they look alike. And at various points during this conference, and we archaeologists deal with similarities. Analogies are it's one of our basic tools that we can use. We can talk about contacts because something looks the same in this part of the world as it looks at the other part of the world. But not always what is the same to us is the same phenomenon, is the same in what is behind it. And I've had various ideas at various points, and one of the points was matte-painted pottery, for example, which is Middle Bronze Age, which is comes up in the Balkans, comes up in southeastern Italy. Is it automatically related because it's matte-painted? And a similar discussion, I think, a similar question we can pose is tumuli. Are tumuli? Tumuli, I've even heard the phrase, the tumuli phenomenon. Tumuli start in the early Bronze Age, I suppose, or at the end of the Neolithic, and they go on all the way through the Bronze Age. But one tumulus is not the other And some of the tumuli that we've seen are different than others. Now, what we need to do is to test and evaluate our notions of similarity. Our terminology needs to be, on the one hand, and be embedded and verified among data, technical research of data, but also in theoretically informed models of what actually was happening that made things look alike or appear alike as they do. Now, a second topic I'd like to bring up. This actually has the wrong heading, because the second topic is that I'd like to bring up is the topic of nodes. And of course, Francesco Iacono emphasized the fact that the context between the Aegean and the Central Mediterranean appear to be very nodal. And naturally, we have very much attention for these nodes. And the place, but we should not forget the non-nodes. We should not forget, and this is why I agree with Michael Galati's question on the impact. What in the end is essential is the relationship between these nodes and the place of the nodes within local and regional contexts. And for example, we have the strange phenomenon that the locally produced Mycenaean type pottery in Italy hardly seems to circulate within Italy. I was very happy to hear that at Punta Zambrona there is pottery from the Sybaris site. But as far as we can see, there's hardly any circulation. What does this say about relations between different sites and different areas? With the emphasis on nodes, I sometimes feel that there has come an enormous emphasis on elites. And someone said, I don't know who it was, we need the non-elites. And this is an important aspect. The impact of intercultural contacts are of interest not only to elites that have the capacity to initiate them. And the impact of intercultural contacts on societies as a whole, and especially also on non-nodes, should be assessed. And well, Reinhard Jung and Marco Pacciarelli said that they wanted to adopt a Marxist perspective. I would almost say that I would like to adopt an activist agenda, and I would actively advocate against transporting some kind of neoliberal agenda to the Bronze Age, in where contacts and intercultural contacts are automatically good and favorable to everyone. There are losers in processes of globalization, as Ian Morris has also written, and we need to have more insight in these aspects. Now, with regard to the future research, because I thought it may be good to arrive at some sort of a thematic agenda, I have two sources where I looked at. And the first was the lecture by Professor Tusa, which opened this conference. We need to do as much research as we can to investigate the coasts of the Mediterranean. This is a picture from Zakynthos. At the back is the site, the Mycenaean site of Vasilikos Kaloyeros, and in front we see the Zante Royal Hotel, which in the 1990s is built on top of a Paleolithic and Neolithic site that was explored by Augustus Sordinas in the late 1960s. And this is happening everywhere, all over